All right, great. So welcome to the 2021 Virtual IoT and Edge Days at the Eclipse Foundation. My name is Hassan Jaber. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for IoT, Edge, and Sparkplug Working Group. And here with me, I have Jonathan Levell. Jonathan, he works for IBM, and he's the lead architect for the message gateway products that IBM has donated the source code to starting point for Amlin project. John, he's one of the MQTT technical committee at the Oasis Standards Body and has worked on a messaging progress for more than 15 years. John, the mic is yours. Just before we kick off the first session, please note that there will be 10 to 15 minutes Q&A session by the end of each session. So please, if you have any questions, just say something on the right side of the of your screen, and we can get your questions on time. So thank you, and stay tuned.
Hello, everybody. Just give me a second to get my screen sharing set up, and then we'll. So I'm hopeful that people can now see my screen. So in this talk, we're going to do an introduction to Eclipse Amlin, and I'll have to talk about the IBM product that it's going to be based on. I'm going to be the project lead for Eclipse Amlin, and I was the lead architect for the IBM product, which is Message Gateway, that it was based on. As Hassan mentioned, I've also been on the MQTT technical committee, which is a committee that defines a standard, which is a way of IoT devices talking via this protocol over the internet. So let's spend a little time to find out what Amlin is, and then we'll talk a little bit about its current status and the future. So Amlin is derived from an IBM product called Message Gateway. The full title of Message Gateway is the IBM What's an IoT Platform Message Gateway, but it's always been Message Gateway to its friends. And the Message Gateway sits between the enterprise applications and the IoT devices. So if you look at the picture down here, you've got IoT devices out in the world. They could be small embedded devices or cars or other things. And then in the enterprise, that can be running in the data center or in a public or private cloud. And Amlin is a message broker that sits in between them and allows bidirectional communication via publish and subscribe between these devices and enterprise applications or between the devices themselves. So Message Gateway is a stable, mature, production-ready code base that customers have been running for years, but IBM has decided to open source it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that decision fairly soon. So we have this strange situation where you have a very stable code base that's very mature, but Amlin itself is an Eclipse incubator project. So it's all very new. We haven't yet contributed the code. That is something that we hope to do by the end of May. There may be a short delay, but I'm certainly hopeful that fairly early in June, we will donate the code to Eclipse. I should mention where the name Amlin comes from. Amlin is Welsh for envelope, because it looks after the messages in between the time that the sender sends them and the receiver receives them. So Message Gateway in this picture is this oak tree. It's stable, mature, it's widely used in production, and Amlin will be based off this foundation, but it's still being set up. IBM plans to donate this code because they want to differentiate higher in the stack. So they are going to have offerings that include the Amlin code base, but will differentiate by the way that you can analyze data and manage IoT assets and so forth, and see this sort of plumbing layer that Amlin. Amlin is this middleware layer allowing connectivity as something that would be good if we could grow a community around it and sort of use common code bases, which we hope Amlin will grow into. It's not IBM walking away from this code base. Certainly, we will be using it in IBM software products that we have already released and new software products going forward. But we will offer solutions, whereas this technology is more of a component, a part of this. So let's take a little bit more of a look at what Amlin will be and what Message Gateway already is. So you often see when you're using Message Gateway, a situation like this. So in the middle of the picture, we've got a pair of message gateways, and these are work together as a highly available pair. And then therefore, if one message gateway goes down, e.g. because it's being upgraded or because of a hardware failure, then the other message gateway takes over and ensures that communication is not interrupted. And then on the right-hand side of your picture, you've got a very technical diagram of a cloud, and you've got a computer there representing applications running in a data center. And then on the left-hand side of the picture, we've got some typical things that might talk to Message Gateway. So you've got embedded devices, you've got IoT devices, and you also have things like mobile phones and web browsers often commonly use this protocol called MQTT, which is an efficient protocol that sends data across a TCP connection over the internet, usually to up to Message Gateway and then onwards to other recipients. I should mention at this point that Eclipse is the home for many MQTT-related projects. Just to pick a couple, there is Eclipse Parho, which is a collection of MQTT clients for different languages, and Parho can connect to MQTT servers, and certainly it can, the clients can connect to Message Gateway, and so as we start to do releases of Amlin, they will be able to connect to Amlin as well, because Amlin fully will support the MQTT v3 and v5 standards. And aside from Parho, there is also the Mosquito lightweight MQTT server, which is already part of Eclipse. And so Amlin will form a sort of part of the Parho Mosquito Amlin family. So I wanted to talk a little bit about different places that Message Gateway had been used, because I imagine that these are the sort of example use cases that people will use Amlin. I haven't put individual customer names and logos on them because there are no customers yet using Amlin. I'm hoping that as we grow the project and grow the community, then companies will come forward and actually migrate from Message Gateway or other things onto Amlin, and then we will proudly use their name and logo in the future. But at the moment, Message Gateway is widely used in the automotive industry. So a number of car companies use it to talk between the car and the base. So all sorts of things get sent across it, like diagnostics and all sorts of things like weather reports, that kind of thing. But it's also used by car companies in factories. So as well as communications to the car, you have monitoring of the equipment making the car, and so that the factory can be as efficient as possible. But the places that use MQTT and Message Gateway are pretty diverse. We've seen a number of banks use it for mobile applications, or in fact in their websites. And then we also see it in sort of traditional IoT devices. So if you think about a garage door opener, you can use that. We have customers who use Message Gateway to support garage door openers. So you have a mobile phone app that allows you to remotely open and close your door when you don't have a line of sight. And both the mobile phone and the embedded device in the garage door opener talk MQTT up to a Message Gateway server. There's a wide variety of customers using it. So a couple of other examples are you have white goods like cookers and freezers that can use MQTT. and lifts as well that use it. And people sometimes wonder what the use cases are for smart appliances or lifts, and they tend to fall into two broad categories. You have end users, consumers who want to be able to do things like monitor when their washing machine has finished using a mobile phone app. And so having an internet connected washing machine allows you to know when you need to go and empty your washing machine. But it also allows manufacturers to get a bunch of diagnostics from the appliances. So if a customer phones you and says that the appliance has stopped working, then rather than sending a repair person out to find out what the problem is, and then perhaps having to do another visit to repair it, if you have diagnostics, then you can hopefully get the appliance fixed faster and have happier, more satisfied customers. So we've talked in a sort of broad overview of what it's for, connecting all sorts of different things to back-end applications. But the question is then, so what actually is it? And so at the moment, it's a standard piece of Linux software. IBM has sold it in the form of an RPM. So this is a installable package that installs on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. And I'm hoping that as we become a community project, we'll have volunteers who will help us make packages for other Linux distributions. And so organizations and individuals will either be able to download packages from Eclipse or get at least some of the components from their Linux distribution repositories. We also support containers, as is very common now, message gateway, and therefore Amlin is often run in a container, and the RPM we provide comes with an example Docker file. We don't provide a pre-built container image because we find end users tend to want to customize the container in some ways by adding software or configuring things before they deploy the container. So we come with an RPM and a Docker file. And Message Gateway has a number of components, the primary one being the message broker itself, and that component has relatively few dependencies. So I think it's likely that we will find that in Linux distributions going forward. But the server isn't the only component. I want to mention that we also have a web UI, and this is a separate piece of software that can run on the same computer or in the same container or in a different container. And this web UI allows you to manage multiple servers from the one UI. And as well as being able to see what's going on, you can also configure and control it. It's a thin layer on top of the REST interface of the server component. So anything that you can see or control using the web UI, you can also control by a REST interface to make things automatable. I wanted to mention a little bit about the history of the product because it shapes what it is today. So quite a long time ago now, in 2013, IBM launched a hardware appliance called Message Site, it was back then. And this hardware appliance had a lot of custom hardware to make it go incredibly fast. So you could send messages through this at very, very high speeds. But over time, with the move to the cloud especially, we found that people wanted to be able to have a pure software version so that they could virtualize and put it in containers and run software alongside it. So IBM then released a software product, originally as a virtual machine and then as an RPM that was called originally Message Site, but then renamed to Message Gateway. But the history of the product has shaped it somewhat. It has a lot of very efficient, performance-sensitive code written in C that was designed when we were a very, very performance-focused hardware appliance. And if I show a slide that I'm not going to talk too much about, which is the architecture of the software product, you can see a lot of the components here in blue are written in C, which is because of its high performance ancestry, and we don't have many points where users can plug in plugins and things, but we do have some, and I expect over time the number of different types of plugins that you can add on to this Amlin will grow as we develop. Originally, when we were a hardware appliance, plugins were not something that was supported because we would have had to have had a much more general purpose operating system and more user visible parts if we had plugins. But as we're now a software product, as we go on, I expect more plugins to be created. In the web UI, as well as monitoring what's going on, you can configure rules that allow you to manage large numbers of devices efficiently. So the aim here is not to add a rule per device. You want a small number of policies that each apply to a very large group of devices, or even better, all devices, so you can control what topics a device can publish on or receive messages on. If I show an example here, so I'm configuring using the web UI a rule that says that any device can subscribe on a topic that has its username as the second bit there, so that a user called Bob can subscribe to messages Bob, and a user called Fred can subscribe to messages /Fred. And without having a rule per device, then you can very easily get a sort of private topic that acts like a mailbox for each user. And a lot of the design of Amlin is designed so that, although it's simple for small installations, as you scale to hundreds of thousands or even millions of devices, the system should cope with that. And you as well as actually physically scaling to that type of number of devices, the way you monitor the system and the way you control the system is designed such that each device you add doesn't create headaches. I've already mentioned that you often get pairs of message gateway servers. This is for reliability. So each message that arrives at the primary server is replicated to the standby server before the message is acknowledged, before the sender has a receipt that the message has been sent. And this way, if one server fails, you have the other server take over without too much loss of communication. The messages are replicated over the network. There's no shared storage. You don't need distributed file systems or anything, so that this works relatively nicely in a cloud environment where you want to keep the primary and the secondary in different availability zones. And we've done a lot of testing with the primary and secondary are long distance apart, so we tested them in different continents, allowing the servers to be well separated, and a disaster that affects one should not affect the other. So I've talked about high availability for reliability, but we also support clustering, which allows you to scale. So if you have more devices than can be serviced by a single server, then you can have clusters of message gateways, often clusters of message gateway pairs. And this allows you to share a topic tree over a number of servers, so that if a device connected to one server subscribes on a topic, and then a device on a different server in the cluster publishes on the topic, the Amlin infrastructure will make sure that the message is routed through the cluster to the receiving device, allowing systems with very large numbers of devices to be constructed. So we've talked about the server, and there's also the web UI, but there are other components that will be part of the initial release. So there is something called the message gateway bridge, and this allows you to connect a network of Amlin servers, or in fact, Amlin servers and other MQTT brokers in a network such that messages arriving on one topic on one broker are always forwarded to other topics on other brokers. So you can build networks where messages are routed around the network and filtered, etc. So this kind of bridge allows the topic string to be changed as it goes between brokers, and it allows filtering based on message properties. So there's metadata that comes with a message in MQTT v5, and you can say only forward messages that are marked high priority, for example. And as well as being able to build a network of message brokers that support MQTT, we also have support for forwarding events to Kafka, which is a common messaging system that you may have come across before, so that you can use it for fan-in systems where lots of devices are sending lots of messages, and these messages go through message gateway and onwards to Kafka. I've mentioned quite a few times a performance and efficiency, and you can scale vertically a single instance up to manage lots and lots of devices. We have some rules of thumb there where depending on what the device is doing, you want about 1 gig of RAM for every 4,000 devices you're connecting. And we certainly have instances that have many hundreds of thousands of connected to them, and you can scale it further and have millions of devices connected to a single instance if that's what you want to do. There is, at the bottom of this slide, which I think will be distributed to people who want these slides, a link to a performance report written for Message Gateway, and I would expect similar numbers to apply to Amlin when we start doing releases of Amlin. And given the right hardware, you can have millions of messages a second go through a broker. So I've talked about what it's for, and I've talked a little bit about a number of the features. But at the moment, you can't download Amlin. So let's talk a little bit about what's going to happen next. So the next step is IBM needs to donate the code to Eclipse. I hope that will happen in the next few weeks. So step one is make Amlin exist. So we've got to get the code over to Eclipse, and then we've got to start setting up a build system and CI system, that kind of thing. And then once we have stable builds, to start with, people can use the documentation for the IBM product, the Message Gateway product, but very quickly we want to get things like documentation set up and tutorials for people to come and find out how to use it and get involved. So the next step is to make tutorials and guides and things that will guide people through using Amlin for the first time. And as well as making it easy for users to get involved, we then need to make on-ramps for people to come and help. So the point of IBM open sourcing it is we'd like to get a wider community of people who are contributing to this project. And so that's going to be defeated if we don't make it easy for people to step up and help out in ways that they feel able and want to help out. So as well as guides for end users for how to install it, we need to make things like guides for how you would build it, how you would make changes to it, that kind of thing. Suggested features that would be good places to start for people who aren't familiar with the code base. And then once we've made it exist and we've made it accessible, then the next steps are to extend and improve it. And so Message Gateway has been widely used in containers, as I've mentioned, but the future is Kubernetes, and so we need a Kubernetes operator that makes it easier for users to install and manage and scale. And because a messaging broker is stateful, like a database, then Kubernetes is harder with stateful software. So an operator that allowed you to control the number of instances, that kind of thing, would make it much easier than it currently is, where people have to do that kind of thing manually. And then looking further out into the future, there's many more things that we can add. For example, I've mentioned already that I'd like to see more plugin APIs, where at the moment the number of points that you can extend Amlin is limited, but going forward we can, I'm sure, find innovative ways for people to extend it in other ways. And also in cloud environments, you also often have this kind of message breaker behind a load balancer, but it's sometimes useful to have a tiered architecture where there is a sort of proxy between the load balancers and the message breaker that is MQTT aware and can route devices to particular brokers, and that MQTT proxy is something that there's going to be some code for in the initial drop from IBM to Eclipse, but it's not something that's a finished product yet. So that's something that maybe as we go forward we can get that building and become a standalone separate product, or a separate component, I should say. So we are very, very early on in the journey for Amlin. There is an awful lot of work to do, and we will be very keen to have as many people as feel able to communicate, to contribute their time and expertise and ideas to this project as we get started on this journey. So I've already mentioned that we'll need guides to help people get to grips with this software. There is also, and I'll provide a link to it in a minute, a website, but at the moment it's very basic. We definitely need to extend it to provide reasons why people might use the software, but also links to detailed descriptions of how you might use it. And then we're always keen for programmers. I should have said that IBM will be ensuring that we will have a number of programmers who are contributing code to this product, because it's an important component of our plans going forward. But we'd love to see contributors from other organizations and companies contribute to this code base, so that it can become a genuine community effort in the future. And at the moment, it comes as an RPM, but I think it would be good to see Ubuntu packages and Gen 2 packages and packages for other operating systems, other Linux distributions going forward. So if packaging is your speciality, then we'd love to hear from you. And then I've mentioned that we'd love to hear from you, but how can you get involved? So here are some links, and again, I think these slides will be available after the talk. There is a GitHub repository, but it is currently literally empty, but it will be a good place to get the code from and raise issues and collaborate. There's a website at the top of this page that is definitely very embryonic at the moment, and we will need to do a lot of work on that. I think Slack is a good way for us to communicate. There is an Eclipse IoT working group Slack workspace, and there is already an Amlin channel on that with some members. And if you have questions, if you'd like to talk to me about this, that's a good place to join and get involved. If you struggle with that, my email address is on the first slide of these slides. It's levell@uk.ibm.com. There is a mailing list set up already, but doesn't have any traffic yet until there's some code. And we will of course have to set up mailing lists to allow users to get involved as well. And so with that, I will stop talking and ask if there are any questions. So I see there are some questions. So the first question is, can you recommend us tools to measure the performance? For example, the CPU, the impact of the encryption algorithm, and to connect with brokers that request security. So that's a good question. One of the things in the code that we'll be contributing is something called MQTT bench, which is a performance harness for measuring performance, for example, the CPU. And that is what we've been using internally at IBM. I don't know whether other people have other ideas. I'd be interested to hear them. So the next question is, will Amlin add more to the already popular Mosquito broker? If so, how? So I think it's aimed at a fairly different use case to Mosquito. Mosquito is very lightweight and is really useful for sort of embedded use cases and small use cases, whereas Amlin is aimed at a sort of much larger enterprise deployment that that involves hundreds of thousands of devices or thousands of devices, and so they're complementary rather than in conflict. Often we see customers who have deployed both. So you have often a Mosquito broker that is connected to by a small number of devices, and then that forwards connections onwards to Amlin. And the question also asks about MQTT-SN. I don't think that it's likely, at least in the short term, that Amlin will speak MQTT-SN, because I would expect that sort of internet level communication to be TCP. So that's the main version of MQTT. SN is a really good and interesting protocol, but I suspect that there will be gateways. There is already an MQTT-SN to MQTT gateway that will mean that a number of devices speaking SN will speak to a gateway nearby them, and then will speak TCP/IP, normal MQTT up to Amlin. And then there is the last question, which is, are there any lightweight solutions for the intermediate level broker located on the edge running Linux on minimal hardware without HD or SSD? And I think Eclipse's answer to that would be Mosquito, that we've mentioned in this talk. Mosquito is a very lightweight MQTT broker that runs with very low requirements, and it's probably the best answer to that question. It's a very suitable product for that.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. And thank you, Jesus, Shan, and Alexander for the questions asked. Any more questions? Yeah, we'll allow a couple of more minutes for the questions. In the meantime, I wanted to thank you, John, for the amazing session, scaling IoT and web messaging infrastructure for profit and fun, and the introduction you made to Eclipse Amlen. It was a great session, and yeah, the interaction overall has been amazing. So if anyone has additional questions,
yes, if people don't have questions now and want to talk to me later, my email address is my surname, which is Levell, Levell, at uk.ibm.com, or the Slack channel on the Eclipse IoT. I see Frederic is asking questions. So yes, MQTT isn't the only protocol that Amlin supports. It supports JMS as well. So there is a JMS client that speaks a protocol up to Amlin, and we provide the JMS client and a resource adapter for connecting it into the Web3 application server. And then, in your experience, which advice can you share to push a new IoT product in a company? Oh, that's a great question. I'm not sure it's one that I have a great answer to. I think the key thing is to probably start small, and don't try and scale before you've got your architecture and sort of security plans sorted, rather than starting with some kind of prototype, scaling it before we're ready, and then getting in a mess because it hasn't been well designed. I'm happy to talk more about that if you have further questions.
Yeah, so 3 more questions from Taishi Hirai. How does data get abstracted so all of the messages from various devices can be streamlined?
So that's effectively a layer above Amlin. So as the messages flow through Amlin, there's no format changes of the messages. They just go as they were sent straight through Amlin. They can be buffered for an application to connect, but then another application, for example, there's an open source project called Node-RED, allows you to connect to MQTT servers and take messages and transform them. And then, so yes, it's effectively an application that would listen to Amlin and do the transformation for the different devices. And then the next question is
from Shant.
Are there any MQTT specifications that Amlin wishes to stand out, since there are a decent amount of proprietary brokers there? So we implement the MQTT v5 specification, which is the newest specification. We have full support for all of the features, things like shared subscriptions, and we have a number of features, things like the way that you can configure things like expiry of clients, so that old clients don't clog up your broker. But I think we mainly aim to stand out on how scalable and hopefully easy to control, monitor, and use we are. And then the last question is, does Amlin support JWT? So it doesn't natively understand what a JWT token is, but we do have customers use them because effectively, if you have an OAuth server, so Amlin delegates authentication either to an LDAP server or an OAuth server. And the way OAuth works is the device gives us a token, in this case a JWT token, and we pass it on to the OAuth server, and then that responds with a yes, it's allowed, or no, it's not allowed, and things like groups. So we don't really need to know what a JWT token is in order for customers to use it, because we pass that token on to the OAuth server, which does need to understand what the JWT token is.
Amazing. Again, thank you, John. It's interesting to know that the folks around are asking questions, and it means 2 things. First of all, that of course the subject that you're talking about is of a high traction, and plus I like the fact that folks are asking how to start the project, and what advice can you give us to start projects. And if this is even from a foundation perspective, gives a great idea that the foundation, and Eclipse Foundation in particular, focuses not only on having the big giants, the IBMs, the SAPs, etc. of the world, but also startups just like you who are trying to be part of something big. So
yes. That's a lovely thing about Eclipse. It's great that we'll have people from all sizes hopefully get involved with projects like this. It's really good.
All right, amazing. So one more time, thank you, John. And as we wrap up, I just wanted to this session and move to the second session. I just wanted to bring to your attention that all the recordings are going to be available right after the end of the day. it will be published on our YouTube channel, Eclipse Foundation YouTube channel. So yeah, the material would be ready for you. And again, if you wish to get in contact with John already shared his contact details on Slack and email, so you please feel free to reach out directly to John. Again, John, thank you so much for the time today. It has been an amazing start of the session.
Thank you very much. I'm
and
looking forward.
we'll speak soon. Thank you.
Thanks. Goodbye.